What's going on, everyone? It's Tyler. Thanks for checking out this video. In this video, we're going to talk about recording in a log profile on your camera, and if you should even consider using log in the first place. Well, the short answer to that question is not necessarily, but before we do that, let's actually talk about what log is. Many camera manufacturers have a log profile that is built into the camera. Sometimes you have to send it off, like Canon with the 5D Mark IV. Thanks, Canon. And what it is, it's a gamma curve specifically designed for that camera sensor to maximize the dynamic range of that camera. Now, it's not the same as a custom picture profile that you make or maybe that you purchase from somebody else that pretty much just kind of brings that contrast slider down and that saturation slider all the way down to emulate a log. And that's all that it's really doing, is it's emulating a log picture profile. But a true log picture profile is a much more sophisticated logarithmic function written to the camera to maximize and specialize that gamma curve, so you get more details in the shadows, more details in the highlights, and a little bit of highlight roll off to kind of get that filmic look. In fact, that's where log picture profiles really kind of came into existence, is from the film days. Godox SL60W system was a way of transferring the film, motion picture film, to a digital format, and it used a logarithmic function to get a really kind of flat picture profile to have all the dynamic range and color information and everything built into that digital file for post-production. So as camera companies started moving towards digital cinema cameras, they developed these log picture profiles for the camera sensors to sort of emulate that Godox SL60W system process of digitizing film. And each camera company has optimized their log profile for their particular camera, and that's why you see a bunch of different flavors of log picture profiles and not just a standard log picture profile. So like ARRI, you've got log C, you've got Canon log, a few flavors of Canon log for Canon cameras, BMD film for Blackmagic cameras, S-log for Sony's, and so on and so forth. So as a result of these log picture profiles from these camera companies, you get more dynamic range out of the sensors, much more filmic look, and a better starting point for post-production and color grading. So with all that good stuff and all the benefits of recording in log, should you just always record in log no matter what? Well, the answer is not necessarily, and there's a few cases where I specifically don't even bother recording in log. And the first reason is YouTube. So right now I'm recording on a Canon C200, and I'm just recording in a kind of baked in Rec 709 look because I'm controlling the dynamic range of the scene. There's not a lot going on. And so all I need to do when I drop the footage on the timeline is maybe add just a little bit of contrast, and that's it, because the image is pretty much ready to go. Another instance where I don't record in log, or I would recommend to proceed with caution in recording in log, is on cameras that only record in 8-bit. Most consumer cameras out there, at least internally, only record in 8-bit. When shooting in log, it's recommended, if you can, to record in 10-bit because you have a lot more color information and a lot more shades of color at your disposal in post-production when you're doing color grading, so you can kind of push and pull the image a lot more without it falling apart. And with 8-bit, you have a lot less information to do that, and the image starts falling apart a lot faster. Now, not all 8-bit is created equally. The Canon C200 8-bit and 4K especially is really robust and really strong, and I've had no problem shooting in Canon Log 3 and pushing and pulling the image, doing color grading. But on the flip side, on the Sony cameras and even the Canon 5D Mark IV that I have Canon log in HD, it just doesn't look good and the image falls apart really quickly. So if you're going to record in log on 8-bit camera, just know where the breaking point is and know when you shouldn't use 8-bit to begin with. And another instance where I wouldn't necessarily record in log is if I'm doing anything that's really fast turnaround, like if I'm shooting interviews, especially if I can control the lighting, or if I'm just doing a vlog or something and I'm shooting on my 5D Mark IV. I may just shoot in a standard picture profile or maybe faithful and just kind of hit the record and drop it on the timeline and do my editing, and just less work that I have to do with color grading if it's not going for a super polished project or anything like that. And with interviews where I can control the lighting and the dynamic range of a certain scene, I'd much rather just record in a Rec 709 color space, kind of more baked in colors, because it just means it's less color grading I have to do in post. But there are a ton of situations where it's very appropriate to shoot in log, and I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm just going to go over a couple where I found it's been helpful. And the first one is the most obvious. It's recording in really high dynamic range scenes. So shooting outdoors or shooting even indoors where there's a window in the scene and you're trying to get the detail of all the exposure values or as much as you can, definitely shoot in log because that's going to retain as much information as possible. Another instance is if I'm shooting an interview or maybe a dialogue scene or something outdoors, I'm definitely going to record and log, because anytime harsh light or any kind of light is falling onto someone's face or skin tones, the highlight roll off when you're recording a log is much more pleasing. Okay, the next reason is a little bit more controversial. It's really just dependent on the camera, and it's in low light. With the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K and the Canon C200 just in 8-bit, and the 5D Mark IV when I'm recording in 4K in Canon Log, it really helps to have Canon Log enabled, because it just kind of compresses that dynamic range a little bit and just kind of gives you a little bit more details in the shadow. But you got to be really careful with low light with certain cameras. I wouldn't recommend it with Sony cameras. It just gets really noisy. Even the Canon 5D Mark IV in HD, the Canon Log would fall apart really quickly. It would be super noisy, so I would definitely make sure that you know how your camera is going to react in low light before you use any kind of log picture profile. But I have noticed on certain cameras that shooting in log really helps kind of bring up the dynamic range, kind of brings, not necessarily brings up exposure, just kind of helps you see all the little details and the shadows and stuff in a particular scene. And you can always crush those shadows if you don't want them, but it definitely helps to have that information there. Again, I can't stress this enough. Make sure whatever camera you're using that it's gonna work. Sony cameras, I never really found it to be all that useful and helpful, and in fact I think it looked a lot worse than just shooting in Rec 709. But on my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K and my Canon C200, I think it looks great, the results are great, and it definitely helps me when shooting in low light just to have a little bit more information. I shoot a lot of weddings and events, and having that extra little bit of dynamic range in the shadows and that little bit of extra information in the shadows really helps me in post to kind of control the image how I want. And the last reason I would record and log, or recommend to record and log, is if you want to have as much color grading control over your image as possible. When you record in Rec 709, it's going to be much contrastier and much more saturated, and you're going to have a lot less wiggle room to play with the colors and everything as opposed to a log image. So if you're wanting to do a lot of heavy color grading, I would definitely recommend shooting a log. You're going to obviously have much higher dynamic range, but you're also going to have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to color grading as opposed to color grading kind of baked in footage. Well, anyways guys, I hope you found that useful or helpful. If you did, definitely hit that thumbs up button. Leave a comment below. Let me know when you do or when you don't shoot in log, and I'd love to hear if you agree or disagree with any of my statements in this video. This has just been my experience, but yeah. Anyways, thanks for checking out this video. Hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't done so already, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.